Welcome to today's Rockler demo. Today we're going to be talking about floating shelves, which are shelves that are supported by concealed brackets, which makes it appear that the shelf is floating. I'm also going to give you some tips on installing floating shelf hardware, because the first time you do it, it can be a little bit tricky. Floating shelves are very popular. They're a great way to add practical storage and a clean modern accent to any room. I recently installed a piece of Douglas fir as a floating shelf above a vanity in a bathroom I remodeled. I wanted the shelf to be directly above the wall tile, and I didn't want any brackets covering the tile, so a floating shelf was a perfect solution, and that tight Douglas fir grain really adds to the clean lines. The two most common methods of hanging floating shelves are to build a box that slides over a cleat that's attached to the wall studs. This is a common method for hanging thicker shelves, such as mantles without visible support brackets. The other option is to use blind shelf supports. There are several different types of these, but the most common is a metal post that's welded to a plate. The plate attaches to the wall, and then the metal post is inserted into a hole in the back of the shelf. They're called blind supports because, well, you can't see them once they're installed. Now, these post-style brackets work well, but they're often not adjustable, so when you install them, there's not much room for error. Today I'm going to show you how to install a blind shelf support that's a little more forgiving and still has a weight capacity of 125 pounds. These i-Semble heavy-duty blind shelf supports feature two posts that are attached to plates. One post inserts into a wall stud and the other inserts into the shelf. The brackets are connected with screws, and there are adjustable slots that allow you to shift the alignment if your install is slightly off, and tilt adjustment screws that allow you to adjust the shelf angle against the wall to 90 degrees. Now, the plates need to fit into a mortise that you have to form on the back of the shelf. So how do you form this mortise? Well, the installation process is explained in detail in the instructions, which are available to download online. But today I'll quickly go over the process of how to use these shelf brackets by installing one of these Timberlink live edge shelf boards. The shelf board you choose must be a minimum thickness of 1 1/8 inches, and this shelf is 2 inches thick. It also needs to be at least 18 inches long to span a typical 16-inch wall stud spacing. So I'm all good on both counts. Once you've located and marked the center of the studs, use a level to mark the center of the shelf. Hold the shelf against the wall and transfer those marks to the back edge of the shelf. Next, you bore the hole for the post that will go in the back of the shelf. This hole must be 9/16 inch diameter and must be at least 5 inches deep, so you need to be sure your drill bit is long enough. We've provided links in the video description to the bits I'm using. Bore the holes on each stud mark and centered along the back edge of the shelf. In this case, I use this portable drill guide that features 2 pins that can be threaded in the base and then lock against the sides of the shelf to center up the drill bit. This drill guide bottomed out before I could reach the full 5-inch depth, so I removed the bit, chucked it directly in the drill, and finished the hole. Next, you need to form the mortise in the back of the shelf that will contain these brackets. These mortises need to be deep enough to fit both plates and the screw heads that connect the brackets. That adds up to a 9/16 inch deep mortise. I'm making special note of these screws because the first time I installed these brackets, I didn't account for them. I only counted for the thickness of the plates, so my mortise wasn't deep enough, and I had to go back and carve out divots for the screw heads. It would have been a whole lot easier for me to just cut the mortise the correct depth the first time, but that's woodworking. Now, as I mentioned earlier, the mortises need to be 9/16 inches deep, but they don't need to be the exact length of the bracket. They just need to be long enough to fit the bracket. If they're a little bit longer, that's okay. So there are several ways you can form this mortise. You can go old school and just use a mallet and chisel. You can use a drill press and a 3/4 inch Forstner bit to bore a series of overlapping holes and then use a chisel to shave the walls of the mortise. The walls don't need to be perfectly flat, and the ends don't need to be squared. The plates just have to fit. Or you can use a router and a template. Make a simple template with a slot that's 3/4 inch wide by 4 3/4 inches long. This is a little longer than the plate so that you don't need to square the ends. Use a piloted pattern bit to route the channel. I clamped the template to the shelf and then used a piloted straight bit and a plunge router to route the mortise. And a third option is to use this compact router mortise centering base. It features 2 guide pins that thread into the base, and then when you press them on the edges of the workpiece, it centers the bit on the edge of the workpiece. Now we're up to the final stage. We're ready to mount the brackets on the wall. I'm going to use a 21/64 inch bit to bore a 3 1/8 inch deep hole in the wall and center of the stud. It's important that these holes are perpendicular to the wall. You can use a square to help align the drill, but I used the Rockler portable drill guide again. Fit the wall posts into the holes and use a level to fine-tune the base plate's position. Mark the centers of the slots toward the outer edge of the base plate. Remove the wall posts from the wall, drill holes for wall anchors, install the anchors, and then fit the wall posts back on their holes and secure with screws. Thread the set screws into the small holes on the base plates of the shelf posts. Attach the shelf posts to the wall posts with the panhead hex bolts, taking care to orient the shelf posts so that the set screws will be at the bottom. If necessary, level the shelf posts by adjusting the set screws. Fully tighten the panhead bolts once the shelf posts are level. Finally, slide the shelf onto the posts. So there you have it, a floating shelf. Now I know that may have seemed like a lot of steps, especially if it's your first time going through them, but if you take it one at a time, none of the steps are difficult. One other thing to note, these two brackets will support a shelf up to 48 inches. If you're trying to mount anything longer than 48, you're going to need to add additional brackets. I hope you've enjoyed today's demo and it may have inspired you to consider installing some floating shelves somewhere in your home, whether it's a series of shelves or a single shelf like I did with my vanity, or maybe even a mantle. I'm Dan Carey with Rockler and Woodworker's Journal. Thanks for watching.